Doesn't it just feel like anywhere we turn, people are talking about anxiety? And I understand why, because the research clearly supports that anxiety levels have been on the rise, both in younger generations and in America as a whole. So, what do we do? I'm a therapist. I work with numerous folks who struggle with anxiety. But here in the podcast space, we want to be able to provide clear resources. We want to be able to provide a Catholic, balanced approach to healing and overcoming anxiety. That's what we're going to be tackling in today's episode. And I'm grateful to welcome back one of my favorite Catholic therapists of all time, Art Bennett, who is just a gem of a human being. Today, we are welcoming him and his daughter, Dr. Lianna Bennett Haidar, to talk about their new book that they co-authored, Anxiety, A Catholic Guide to Freedom from Worry and Fear. The third co-author of this book is Art's wife, Lorraine, but unfortunately she couldn't join us for the podcast today because she needed to watch Lianna's kids, and this is a family show, so this is how it works. So if you struggle with anxiety, this episode, I'm telling you, is going to give you some practical recommendations for how to understand it from a Catholic perspective and how to be able to overcome it. So check out the book to be able to get into more detail around it, but let's get into this episode where we're tackling this conversation about anxiety. Art Bennett and Dr. Lianna Bennett Haidar, thank you guys so much for joining me on today's podcast. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you, Mario. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Well, I feel like I'm getting the whole Bennett family experience in the podcast. I've had Art had you on the show a few years ago to talk about the temperament that God gave you. Then I had Lorraine to come on the show to talk about her book regarding Therese and minimalism. And now I have one of the kids on the podcast. This is fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's a Bennett family affair. Now I've heard that you guys were saying before that Lorraine cannot join us on the show is because she's drew the short end of the stick today to have to watch the kids. Is that how we're doing this?
Yeah, babysitting the grandkids. Yeah.
Babysitting the grandkids. Yeah. So.
You would not want them on the podcast, I can tell you that.
Oh, we can have them on the podcast.
They're cute but disruptive.
It's all right. It's a family-friendly show. They can come on. You know?
You would, I don't know.
Most people, though. Most of my sessions, honestly, I do all my counseling sessions virtually, and a lot of the couples that I'm working with right now have had kids in the last year. And so a lot of nursing moms doing, this and trying to off camera a little bit, and So it's all right. We roll with it on the show. It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. All right. So you guys wrote this book on anxiety. What made you want to tackle this topic? Why say let's get anxious and stressed out about writing a book about anxiety?
It did happen sometimes, but Mario, you're a clinician. Anxiety walks in the door these days, even before the clients do. Almost, it's almost common course of events that people come in anxious about something. And so that's really increased, I think, in the last, 10, 15 years, or at least. But more in the book, it was not just noticing in our professional life. I was a psychologist, I'm a marriage therapist, but just looking around, people we meet, people we talk to, going to the market, going to the doctor, going to church. How many more people would just use terms that are kind of connoted with anxiety, like they're not busy, they're overwhelmed. They're totally stressed all the time. Exasperation, frustrations, people kind of wearing it on their sleeves. So we ran into it clinically, which is already a concern. And people say 1 out of 3 people get a clinical diagnosis of anxiety. That's pretty alarming. That's true. But then seeing it everywhere. So we were thinking it's a very common thing. We're learning some stuff as professional clinicians, and then all 3 of us like to write about Catholic integration of stuff. And so we were thinking maybe there should be some value beyond just the quote clinical audience, people in general. And so we thought maybe we would write a book on it. And Lorraine's not here now. She's a great writer and editor, and is the project manager to get these 2 clinicians to hit the deadlines. It's pretty tough, but so that's why we did it. We think it's a common problem. We just want to give our take on it, and we try to integrate the best in psychology that we know and how the Catholic faith integrates that. See what we could do.
Yeah. Lianna, what was it like writing a book with your parents?
It was, I I cannot recommend it enough.
Oh, wow.
My,
Okay. It's a hot take of the day.
yeah.
Like, write a book with your
So
parents.
my parents approached me with the idea. We had talked over the years, we should
Hmm.
write a book together someday. And I think they approached me about it, a bit over a year ago. And actually, I think it was more along the lines of my mom being like, "So, here's a contract. Please sign this. Like, let publish this book for us."
Hmm.
And at the time, I think I just had my second daughter, or my second child, my daughter. And so I was like, just tell me what I need to do. And it was an amazing experience. My parents have so much experience with writing and publishing books, and I have a lot of
Hmm.
experience with giving them my opinion about things.
Yes.
Um, and so it was an amazing collaborative experience. My mom, she really was like the project manager for this. Did a
Hmm.
lot of editing of our,
Hmm.
because we're clinicians, we can talk and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
share
Yeah.
stories and ideas and thoughts, and she really was able to kind of capture that and turn it into a really, I think, wonderful book that
Oh, yeah.
that isn't just for therapists, but for
Correct.
average person to be able to read. So
Yeah, it's a delight. It's just an easy read. It's really great. You guys did a wonderful job again.
Thank you.
Just as I've talked about with the previous books that you've authored or co-authored, it again sits at that nice integration of faith and psychology. It's not overly one side or the other. It's not sensational. It's really clear. It's got some great directives in it, a lot of practical stuff. Just the understanding of it from a holistic perspective. Yeah, I really thoroughly enjoyed it. So I just from the outset can't recommend it enough to people.
Thank you.
And that can end the podcast. I guess we're over. That's all we need to do, right? It's just give the endorsement and people can go on. But no, okay. So folks who are listening to the podcast might be asking for themselves, right? Things that you just said are overwhelmed, we're stressed out. I'm sure a lot of those terms that you just articulated are things that we all experience. And
Yeah.
these terms get tossed around between anxiety, between stress, even depression gets thrown in that.
Mhm.
And right now, I think because there's been a proliferation of podcasts, people have a little bit more psychological language in their kind of regular lexicon, although they may not fully understand what those terms mean, but because they read it on a blog post or somebody posted something on TikTok or somebody talked about it on a podcast, they kind of use these terms, but maybe don't quite have a firm understanding of like, yeah, exactly what it means. So as we're kind of beginning here, help us understand, how can we make distinctions? If somebody's listening to this and wondering within themselves, do I have anxiety, or am I just stressed out, or is that depression? How does somebody begin the process of marking those and getting a better understanding about, well, what is stress versus what's anxiety, or and then what is something that's just usual kind of run of the mill
Mhm.
versus what's something that now I actually need to really be considering getting some help on?
That's a great question. I could take first stab at it. I think, I mean, it's very fashionable by clinicians to beat up on the DSM, but one thing I like about the DSM on this regard
Hmm.
is the 6-month criteria.
Hmm.
So yeah, people have bad days, people have bad weeks. They just have a bad month. But if you're like chronic threat mode anxiety for like 6 months and you have a host of symptoms, that's not that's atypical. Well, that's common, but atypical in terms of mental health. So yeah, I mean, anxiety is pretty omnipresent, even the best of times or whatever. But comes and then it goes. But if you're in kind of a chronic state, I mean, sometimes you meet people that are in a chronic state of threat mode all the time,
Hmm.
and you kind of look around and see you're not living under a bridge, you're not homeless. I mean, what's up? So I think if it's an extended for a long period of time, let's say 6 months is a clinical thing, and that's different from having a bad weekend or a bad week or even a bad month. And I think that would be one difference, the longevity of it, and then probably the severity of it as well. The kind of things that you used to do that help you get overcome that. Oh, I'll go to the gym and work out and feel better, or I'll have a chat with
Hmm.
my boss about that. I'll set some limits. Okay, it just doesn't seem something else just keeps replacing it. So that kind of chronic sense of I'm always in threat mode a lot about a lot of things. I think that would be sign of maybe I need some help here.
Yeah. So when it starts interfering with your ability to function, to engage in normal things that you would normally be doing, like that's when we would say that it had entered into like a more severe realm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And again, to borrow the language from DSM, which I agree is appropriate here, as you said, it's that when it's impacting your social, occupational life, when it's starting to hinder and prevent you from doing the things that you love to do, or preventing you from moving forward in life, that's when you want to start saying, okay, this is something that requires some help, some intervention here beyond. So that's one piece. But then the other piece is when you've exhausted maybe your resources. It's like, all right, I've drunk all the wine in the house and that hasn't calmed me down. Not encouraging anybody to do that. Okay. But it's an option. All right. Or when the drinking becomes the problem, obviously, like you start habituating stuff to deal with it. It's like, all right, there are other mechanisms here.
To be anxious about being anxious, like the sense you were capturing here. I feel I've tried everything I know. I've gone to all my go-to moves, and it seems to be getting worse. So then you can be in a real kind of a spiral, which is understandable, but also kind of scary sometimes. Life is harder. So I guess that's what we're talking about. The book, I think, is obviously this book is not to replace. If you need to see a therapist, you should, or spiritual director, you should, and make changes in your life. But maybe it's more of a collection of possible ways of addressing it, including therapy, including maybe very intense therapy if it's trauma related as well. And we're not against medication or stuff, but we're probably more on the behavioral side of what you can do to try to get this past you, or at least not dominating your life.
Yeah. All right. So let's get some terms down. Right. Anxiety. What is it? How do we define anxiety?
So one of the ways that we think about anxiety is in relation to fear. It's when we are anticipating a future event, and so it's not necessarily something that is causing us danger here and now in the moment. And so what's going on is either our body is having these physiological responses, heart racing, pulse, accelerating, breathing changes. We're having perhaps racing thoughts, again, usually oriented towards what if this happens, worrying about future things. But anxiety is different from fear, in that fear is, being chased by the saber-toothed tiger. Anxiety is, what if the saber-toothed tiger chases me? And so it may not necessarily be grounded in something that will necessarily happen. Is that?
I think that's why sometimes focusing on the present moment, which is a mindfulness, and it's one of the things we'll talk about, does tend to help, because you're already overcoming the hyper focus on the results, what's happening, what's going to happen. So it's something downstream, not in front of me, but something downstream that it really just caused disruption or fear in my life, and then we worry about that. And it can be vague too. I'm not sure exactly what it is. I just have the sense things are, and that gets triggered. That can become a preoccupation, and it's often the case too. Ruminating and preoccupied with it, and it eclipses what's happening in the present moment, present things. Starts to dominate your life more and more. It can be very disorienting and discouraging.
Yeah. I like to think of it as like a hijacking of our problem solving capacities.
Yes.
So we have this perceived threat that's coming, and we say, we have imagination for a reason. We come up with ideas because now I'm thinking about, here's the thing that's about to happen or can happen. And so how can this manifest? What are the various ways that this threat can actually happen? So we come up with all of them. But then we also start coming up with solutions to every single one of these scenarios. And we get caught in our own kind of multiverse of our mind, because we're coming up with all the different variants of the situation that can happen and having solutions to them. Because what we're trying to do is, in effect, is protect ourselves. That's why it activates the fear mechanism, which is, if I can be prepared for every one of these scenarios, well, then I've done my job to be able to solve it or deal with it as best as possible. The problem with anxiety, though, as we're speaking about, is that it hijacks the system. And then we get into ruminations very quickly, or we can get to the bodily sensations where we get stuck in this very negative feedback loop. And we think that thinking is going to be the thing that's going to solve the outthinking. And so if I think more about the different scenarios and I think more about the different solutions, then I think I'm going to be able to solve this problem or this threat that could potentially happen. But as you guys articulate in the book, certainly this thinking and overthinking is not what gets us out of our anxiety.
Yeah, if anything, it just encourages it,
Mm-hmm.
because it becomes this worry about future threats, and we're trying to reduce the physiological experience of anxiety through this thinking and overthinking.
Mm-hmm.
But the only way to actually truly reduce our fear and anxiety is to encounter the thing,
Mm-hmm.
and to either encounter and deal with it as it is, or to realize that perhaps it wasn't life-threatening. Because, this, as you said, like, this is an ingrained fear response
Mm-hmm.
that is meant to save our life, literally save our life. This ability to recognize something as dangerous to us and to run away from it, like, all of our ancestors must have been good at that, in order for us to be here today, because the Neanderthals who didn't do that, who didn't run away from the saber-toothed tiger, like, they're not here anymore.
They're not here.
So we have this ingrained response that tells us to run from danger. But in our daily life, we're not dealing, for the most part, with, active
Saber-toothed tigers.
Yeah, we're not dealing with saber-toothed tigers. We're not actually.
At least not in Charlotte. I don't know about in Arlington, but I don't have any saber-toothed tigers
None
lying
here
around
either.
here.
Hardly any.
Hardly any up there.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Other things to be concerned about, but
For sure.
not necessarily. Most things that we deal with are not terribly life-threatening, but yet so many people are living in that kind of fear. The fear, the anxiety that spikes from, an email from the boss is the kind of anxiety that would help you, run for your life. And it's just way too much for that situation. And so we're living with this total overload of anxiety that is wildly out of proportion to the situation. And anxiety, what it most wants us to do is to avoid the situation. But the problem is, every time we avoid a feared situation, it confirms in our brain that we did the right thing, that in fact was something to be feared, to be avoided, and that in turn just increases the anxiety.
Yeah. And it wasn't mental health up until the 2000s, let's say, when almost all the money in mental health is going towards meds, and meds have their place, there's no doubt. But it was basically, your husband's annoying you, get rid of him. The job's too stressful, get out of it. You don't like the neighborhood, move. It was always kind of the go-to solution. Or it's too tough, let's medicate it so it doesn't feel so bad. It wasn't to lean in and go after the problem. It was to either buffer it or avoid it. And then lo and behold, now this last 25 years with the insights through neuroscience and stuff, we find out, wow, the brain's actually pretty malleable. Yeah, well, you can have your amygdala firing that this is a fear flight response, or you can shift it up to your prefrontal cortex and take another look at it. Now, how do you do that? What are the techniques? So I think a lot has happened that, to be honest, we find it kind of Catholic congruent. I don't think the Catholic faith is a run away from problems of religion. There's no place in the Bible or the New Testament.
Pick up your cross and come after me is the exact opposite of running away from your problems.
So it's similar to John 16:33, which is, there will be trouble. Christ says there'll be trouble, but I have overcome it. So we're an overcoming religion, and not a run away from religion. All things, though. I mean, obviously, we don't want to be stupid about incurring unnecessary things in our lives. So it turns out the neuroscience is kind of more consistent with that. the old model when your kid was in the bed, a 3 or 5-year-old saying, I'm worried about the boogeyman in the closet, and you just grab him or her hand and go, well, let's go take a look.
Mm-hmm.
Let's turn on the lights and take a look. Okay, you look behind there, and want me to look here.
Yeah.
And is there anything we've missed? Oh, okay, let's look. That kind of model, and then they go back to bed. Well, it might not happen immediately, but it will happen.
Right.
But there's just nothing to be afraid of in the closet. That kind of let's go right after. Now, also part of that story isn't the kid going in there terrified, going with a parent.
Right, that's right.
I'll cover for you. So I'm accompanying you, or I'm helping you with this.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, it turns out it's not a big threat. Something else may come along you have to deal with. But that leaning in model was really pretty much abandoned by therapists and others. So it's like, it's called divorce. Get rid of that knucklehead. What are you talking about? So now we have many more tools, I think. And I think I think it's fascinating. Okay, it seems to be pretty congruent with a lot of what I call principles now, key aspects of our faith, which is to lean in a little bit.
Yes, I'll share a story here. I for many years was working for a marriage ministry based out of New Orleans, Louisiana, and we would do marriage retreats on the north side of the lake in Covington at a retreat center. And the retreats we did I did like 6 of them a year, and it was great. And Sunday morning, I would always wake up before we would start, and I'd go on a run. And the property had, 1,500 acres, and they had trails throughout it all, which was just beautiful to be able to go out and run in these woods. It was really special. Well, I had been doing this for years, and then one particular morning, I went out on a run, and I don't know what was going on, but these nasty biting horseflies that were like, they were huge, because every bug in Louisiana is huge. Okay, so bigger. It's like Avatar the movie. You're like, what am I on? Like, how big is that roach? Why is that even there? Right. So even like the horseflies were larger than life. And I'm out on a run, and I don't know what they saw, but they were coming to me, and they were biting me, and so I just started sprinting, and I thought I was going to get 4 miles in, but I didn't get but a mile in that day, because they were just, no matter where I went, they were following me. And so I ran back to the retreat center. Finally, they were off me, no problem. Well, the next time that I went back to the retreat center to lead a retreat and went on a run that morning, I was going on a run, and at some point, a couple miles into the run, I didn't even realize this, but I became aware that I had gone a different way than where the horseflies were. And it wasn't even a conscious decision. I just was going in a different direction. But when I became aware of it, I said, why am I running this way? Oh, I'm running this way because the last time I went on the run, there were these horseflies that were biting me in this direction. And so I automatically went in a different direction, back to the avoidant technique that you spoke about. And that's my body being protective, and my body doing what it needs to do. It recognized there's a threat over there, mapped out where the threat was, it said, let's go in a different direction. But to the point that we're making, for me to not keep that mapping ingrained in my system, once I became aware of it, I turned around and I ran back to the place where the horseflies were, just so I can remap my nervous system to not be conditioned to thinking that the flies are always going to be there. And so I purposely went back in that direction to deal with that. And I think that's kind of the model, what we're speaking about, is that like,
exactly.
If you get that email from your boss, of course it's going to generate some stress. Of course it's going to generate some anxiety. But rather than the normal tendency of, let me pick your options. You otherwise forget about it for 2 days, or you pick it up and you bring your coworkers in and you're like, what could they be? What could they want? Or what's wrong with them? And you start bad mouthing your boss and talking ill of them, or you let it hang over your head for a day and then you get a couple extra drinks of wine, all the other things that you can do. It's like, let's just breathe through this, relax, deal with it, step back, deal with it. Why don't you just try to draft a response? If that feels too much, or you still feel too activated, take a step back, then get back to the response, and then take a step back. And then slowly you're trying to just take steps of engaging in withdrawal and engaging in withdrawal. And that withdrawal is back to you said earlier about like taking the hand of the kid. That's the appropriate use of the attachment response. The attachment response is to activate that sense of security in the midst of those anxieties. But if we are too safe, then we're just coddling and we're not actually engaging. But if we're too engaged, then we're overactivating the threat response, and that's where it becomes problematic.
Right. Yeah.
Really, that's really good. I mean, you've talked about actually in your I guess we call it a reframe, reapproach to it. A lot of great skills in there that are built in, probably natural, do whatever. And I think the first one is just to take that pause and let me think of what I can do here.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I guess I took a different route. It makes sense. Last time I did it, the horse flies ate me up, but it only happened once. I'll try it again. Or the other is, about the email. Huh. Yeah, I guess I have to respond. I don't respond right now. Let me think about what might be the. It's almost like I like to think of like an elevator. We have our amygdala down here.
Yeah.
Which it limits us. It's very limiting. And anxiety, I think from the Latin word, is like limiting, shrinking.
Oh, that's interesting.
Opposite, shrink, fight, flight, or freeze. Okay.
Yeah.
And then if you pause and like you said, oh, let me think about that. That alone is already breaking the reaction cycle right there. And now let's think about it. So then you're also kind of take the elevator out of the amygdala up here, prefrontal cortex, where place new ideas, thoughts, prayers. But I noticed when you said the opening prayer, you had these pauses. Very beautiful, by the way. Probably a very natural view, but I was thinking, oh, that's every word of the prayer sinks in. It's not just like sometimes we do. I just noticed that when you did that. That's a different kind of praying. That's a different kind of getting ready. So I think you put in some other things you can do. I mean, you kind of blended it all in nicely. I thought, but that, because I guess our go-to move is either fight it or flight it if we're afraid. But to try a different way of looking at things in a healthier way with more options, so to speak.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm often trying to encourage people to do to combat their anxiety is to learn to be curious. So a great example is kind of that moment that you had with on the run with the is just like being curious, like why am I going a different route, like what's going on here. Because when we're curious, it's a different part of our brain is engaged in those moments. It's not just the fight, flight, or freeze part of our brain.
One of the things I appreciate about the book is the way you guys offer these options for people, and it's all based around this notion that your body's trying to do the right thing. And so if we become aware of what our response is, and we meet that with harshness or we meet that with criticism, what's wrong with me? Why would I go that way? There aren't any flies there. That's just stupid. Why would I do this? And that's the way we tend to react to our reactions. And then when we do that, though, we're only perpetuating the anxiety. But as you said, Lianna, so beautifully, it's like if we could just meet that with a little bit of curiosity, a little bit of wonder, a little bit of grace, say, well, why did I just do that? And not in a condemning tone, but really in that sense of like, what's going on there, And now we're all clinicians, we all have advanced degrees, so in years of clinical training, so we can ask these questions and we kind of get a sense, we kind of know maybe how to respond to it. But for anybody listening, to be able to ask that question is a good one. And even if you don't have an answer to it right away about how to respond, or maybe you didn't think about doing that email, okay, no problem. But maybe that's just a place where you can invite some grace. You can invite the Lord into your experience.
I'd like to highlight that just that pause, to not just react immediately, is really putting on a whole different track. And I think that's one of the key aspects that usually is in our control. I mean, every once in a while we have to respond like right now. The house is on fire or something. That's the amygdala covers all that. Just the act. I remember I read the biography of Washington's biography, and it turns out, Jefferson was and Hamilton were on his staff. They just hated each other. They went at each other all the time. Jefferson was a real hothead. Jefferson had a model where he never responded by letter critically without waiting 10 days. Wow. He knew he was a hothead.
Wow.
We'd go after someone's throat. He was a very clever guy. He also knew every letter he wrote would be around forever. He'd wait 10 days, and often he never sent them, or they were always modified. So he was a smart guy, but he had a hair trigger of anger. Knew that about himself. So he instituted the pause as a discipline. And I think that's right. So just the pause. Now, if the pause turns out to be stonewalling, I'm still pausing. 3 months, I'm not talking to you still. I ain't going to work either. That's just another defense. So, but
Or
let
if
me
the
think
pause
of,
is avoidance or distraction,
that's right. So that's
that's
another
not going to work
temptation.
either. Yep, yep,
Another
yep, yep.
temptation.
Mhm.
But most of us in our hyper achievement culture we're in, you got to perform all the time, and
Mm.
everything depends on you performing more. So go out and work, and then work out after you work, and then that kind of mentality we're in. Just taking a very pregnant pause.
Mm.
I mean, I know you're all about hope in your podcast.
Mm.
So hope and options can start coming in. So take a look. So I think that's a go-to move we can all, just like couples and fighting.
Absolutely.
You can actually listen for a little longer than you're doing.
Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to the show. I'm taking a quick break here from my conversation with Art Bennett and Dr. Lianna Bennett Haidar. To want to encourage you, please, to leave me a question on drmariusacasa.com/ask. I've already fielded a number of questions, and I'm grateful to be able to start tackling them on future episodes of the Always Hope podcast, both in solo episodes as well as ones where I bring them before my guests. So please, if you have listened to this show in this particular episode and you're wondering, I have some questions about anxiety, or maybe I have questions about dating, maybe I have questions about marriage or intimacy within marriage, or I have questions about the sermon. I'm thinking about taking some risks in life and not sure how hope is actualized in these moments. Well, these are the themes that we talk about repeatedly in the show, and I want to be able to answer your questions related to them. So please head on over to drmariusacasa.com/ask. And let's get some questions. Let's get this conversation going. I'm here to be able to provide some resources for you. I'm happy to be able to tackle these questions on air because I want to be able to provide a show that is relevant to you and to your needs. And so many blessings to you. Thank you guys so much for chiming in, and let's get this conversation going. Again, head on over to drmariusacasa.com/ask. Leave your questions, and I will tackle those on future episodes of the Always Hope podcast. And so let's get back into this conversation with Art and Lianna. We'll speak about that a little bit, okay? So Art, a little bit ago, you were talking about this elevator from the amygdala into our midbrain into our prefrontal cortex. Detail that out a little bit more for people. Like, how is our brains working here when it comes to anxiety?
Yeah, I think this is so fascinating. And I've been a clinician a long time. We didn't know this. When the amygdala fires, that's that little tiny thing here. Your options are pretty much, I can fight it, I can run away from it, or I can freeze. That's about it. It only allows you to do that. Now, what's really fascinating, the research shows, is that when that part fires, this part shuts down. Mm-hmm. This is why when you're in chronic arguments and stuff, you say, I'm about to say something to my wife that I've always said. Every time I say it, it makes it worse. So I think I'll say it again because I don't know what else to do. I'm in fight mode. I don't know what else to do.
Right.
Or also, though, if this part's working, the part you get from homilies, prayer, calmness, shuts the amygdala down. Mm-hmm. So the reciprocal. So that alone is fascinating. So that's what I talk. So Lianna gave a great idea. One of the ways of getting out of the amygdala is curiosity. Rather than hit the horn and be all upset that the lady just jumped on the crosswalk and almost hit her, you go, I wonder why she did that. I wonder why I wasn't thinking that might happen. That gets you back up here, and then options occur. So here there's three options, and none of them are good enough for love. Fight, or freeze will not enhance any relationship of love unless you rescued somebody from a fire. I guess that would count. Up here is where all that stuff, connecting, bonding, listening, empathy, and we want to push ourselves up to this floor, particularly with interpersonal and important problems that we have in our marriage, our lives, and our parenting, and our friendships.
Yeah, so the amygdala is, it's that deep core part of our brain that is, the responses are just built in, but they can be enhanced through experiences that we've had. Our frontal cortex is something that takes a lot longer to build. I think we know now that our prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed or connected until we're 25. So right. that's the main problem with teenagers, right? Is that they're all amygdala, they're all brains down, they're very little frontal cortex. But learning to engage our frontal cortex. One of the good things about this, presuming our brain is working fairly well, fairly appropriately, is that a lot of what we need to engage these are skills that we can build.
Right.
The amygdala, that's instinct.
Yeah.
But these responses to try to moderate the amygdala these are skills that we can learn, and they take practice, and it takes time, and it takes patience, and it takes kindness. A lot of people struggle with. I like to use the analogy you mentioned, like the analogy that I usually use is like our amygdala, goes off like a fire alarm, right? And like it's loud and it's aggressive, but when the fire alarm goes off in the building, we shouldn't just, even though it's a signal of danger, that doesn't mean we should just jump out a window. Like, well, here we'd be okay because we're on the first floor. But, normally I'm in my third floor office.
I'm in my second floor office right now. So I prefer not to jump out the second floor either.
And so the thing is, even if the fire alarm is going off and maybe there's an actual fire, even if it's an actual emergency, there's usually enough time even in there for a pause to assess, what am I supposed to do? And this is something that if we've ever been through a fire drill, we know this is why we do fire drills, because we don't want people to just jump out a window. We want them first to go check the door. Is the doorknob hot? Okay, so do I smell smoke? Use the other senses to engage other senses to try to figure out what's going on. And let's say, yes, the doorknob is hot, which signals maybe we can't go through that door. There's smoke coming through. What other exits are there? Even if the window is the only other option, that doesn't mean you jump out of it immediately.
Right.
Maybe we call for the fire department, maybe we assess, like, is there a way that I can safely get out? It might end up being the option, but there's, even in an emergency, there still is space for trying to assess. But that's why we need training. That's why we train fire drills, because that's why we talk about these things, so that even in an emergency where we need to act quickly, we can engage that frontal lobe. And so that's what we then need to try to figure out, like, what are the fire alarms that go off for us in our daily life, telling us this is not okay, this is not safe, and what are the emotional equivalents of like jumping out the window that we do, avoiding the text messages, letting our inbox pile up to like 10,000 messages.
Stop it. Now you're talking about me. All right. So we'll keep this conversation going. But no, what you're bringing up is great ways to think about this. All right. So the amygdala, the fire alarm, as you're speaking about, it serves a reason, and it has to be there. And as we've said, there is a negativity bias that we want to focus in on that. Well, because if there is a saber-toothed tiger chasing us, if there is a fire, if there is a car about to crash, there's real threats that are present that we have to be attentive and responsive to. And we share that kind of reaction with mammals across the animal kingdom, because we want to be able to move and go. We need that extra adrenaline. We need that extra testosterone. We need that extra cortisol. We need just that extra stuff in us to get us ready to go. But it does, as you've indicated, Art, beautifully, that it shuts down the other parts of our brain, and it makes it limited, and we can get into tunnel vision, or when people say, like, you've seen red. That's scary. You ever had a client do that in a session where they're like seeing, like, that's like trying to calm them down after that. It's intense.
It really is.
And so to recognize that we have to get the other parts of our brain engaged, and the magic sauce is finding the balance between all of that. And I think this kind of speaks to the Catholic way that you were communicating earlier, that virtue is always found in the middle, and healing or growth is always found in knowing, right? Wisdom is what guides us to be able to take these steps forward, where we can utilize this extra energy to our advantage. Now, one example here that you to pull in from the book. So Lorraine's not here to defend herself, but she beautifully shares in one of the chapters that podcasting became a source of anxiety for her, related to the last book that she wrote. And you guys share beautifully in the book some narrative about her coming to Art and Art being encouraging and just being a good husband and supportive. And then at some point she comes to you, Lianna, and you're like, I'm going to be a therapist to my mom. Like that's
Yeah,
what I'm going to do.
Lianna solved it.
Like I'm gonna be a therapist to my mom here, and I'm gonna force mom to kind of start thinking about what's the moment, why that moment, what's the fear. Let's really identify, which is just bold. That's really incredible for you to do that.
I'm lucky we have that relationship where I'm like,
yes,
put this hat on. Will you tolerate this?
Yeah, I'm not daughter right now. Like I have this is my sidey hat. I'm putting this on.
Yeah.
And you ended with this great little reframe, which is something else in addition to curiosity that we can talk about. It's the reframe. And you say to your mom, basically, this is what you need to tell yourself. Yes, my heart is pounding, but that's just my sympathetic nervous system sending blood to my brain to help me think quickly on my feet. Just that explanation, right? This is what's going on. I'm not dying. You're not going to die from this podcast interview. You're afraid that you might embarrass yourself or let down the publisher. That's fine. But what are the chances of that actually happening? Very, 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 very slim to none. Let's try to look at this and understand what's going on. And from that vantage point, then we can make the right decision moving forward. Then we can say, all right, it's there. And the reason that the anxiety is there, and for her, is because, well, there's a value that's attached to that. She wants to do good. She wants to perform well, right? She wants to be able to communicate a clean message to others. There's nothing wrong with that value. That's a beautiful value to have. We want to uphold that value. We want to be able to encourage excellence and a desire to want to do good. There's nothing wrong with that. But it gets the best of us when it becomes sole focus, and it prevents me from then being able to engage because the anxiety becomes too much.
Yeah.
That's a great reframe. I think it's a critical one too. I mean, actually, I was looking forward when we were to chat with you, Mark, because I know you do a lot of work with young people dating and
talk about anxiety.
A great ministry. He's really good at it. But I run into this in counseling a lot, where if I call her up, if I call him up, or if we go out again, it's going to be very awkward, probably. And they go, that's why I'm not going to do it. So somewhere, at some point, awkward went from being a little uncomfortable, totally normal, to being a big red stop sign. And what's happening there, I think, is that there's a misunderstanding that if I go walk across the room and ask her out, I mean, you could say no. And my brain will brain will fire on that, because this is a big moment. Somebody I really want to get to know. Yeah. We can misidentify that as anxiety, when what it probably is adrenaline, the strongest drug in the human body, according to psychiatry. Saying, hey, be funny, be amusing, be open-minded, stand up straight and give a big smile and go for it, big guy, that kind of. But if we interpret that as anxiety, and we interpret awkwardness as a dead end, oh my God, how many experiences in life will we miss?
Wow.
Yes. Or this new trend now is, don't teach a kid how to ride a bike, because for sure they're going to fall down. They will. For sure they're going to scrape their knees. They will. Put a helmet on them. They want nothing happen. So I don't want my kid to endure that.
Wow.
And
is that a real trend?
Right?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. That's not a real trend. Is that a real trend? What, for real?
Next time you go driving, I don't know about, maybe we are. See how many kids you see on a bike.
Yeah. Okay.
Answer. You see a lot of people in their 30s and 40s overpaid for bikes and have all the gear. Of course, they're from a different generation where they learned to ride a bike. So anything that could cause any amount of distress or awkwardness is now defined as horrible, awful, terrible. So it's a misidentification. So, but part of it is when our brain, when we have something we have to do really important, like I'm batting third, I'm about to go up to the plate, or I got a big interview coming on, or I'm going to talk to Mario on a podcast, your brain will be ready, try to be ready for it. That's adrenaline. It's not anxiety. And awkward is not the same thing as foxhole during World War I.
Right.
So that's a reframe we have to make in our culture, be comfortable with being awkward. Again.
Yeah, so the problem with the, confusing the adrenaline with anxiety is then we feel that adrenaline building, and then maybe it is mixed with some anxiety, and then we
Mhm.
avoid, and then our body experiences relief. And then what our body learns, because our body doesn't just learn through what we talk or tell ourselves, it learns through what we experience and what
That's
we
right.
do.
That's right.
So when our anxiety decreases because we avoided, then that confirms for our brain that that was something to be avoided, that was a
Right.
threat. But what can happen then, that can increase, and and if our anxiety can continue to increase and increase and increase, people can end up having panic attacks. And I think
Mm.
that sometimes people talk about, like, oh, I had a panic attack about this thing or the other thing, but panic attacks can be really physiologically extremely difficult experiences. One of the
Oh,
hallmarks of a
awful.
panic attack is often that we think we are in danger in those moments. Our
Mhm.
life literally feels threatened. People think they are having a heart attack. One of the most common reasons that people go to the ER, experiencing chest symptoms, more often than not, it can be a panic attack that they're
Right.
having, not
Right.
actually an an actual heart attack or an event.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Panic attacks are awful.
it
I mean,
can't be understated how good your body is at turning on the alarm bells and telling
mhm.
you are not safe.
Yes.
And that is why it can be so difficult. But that's where the learning to reframe this, my heart is accelerating, my breathing is off, even feeling dizziness, that those things individually don't necessarily mean you're in danger. What if we interpreted that differently? What if we interpreted the accelerated, heart rate as my body's trying to pump blood to my brain so that I can
Mhm.
think quicker? So
So
yeah,
we think,
back to the
But
reframe.
but what
Um,
about, okay, so like shifting gears here just for a second, all right? So the book's written to a Catholic audience, all right? So for Catholics listening to this, I mean, how many times does Christ say, "Be not afraid"? Um, or Padre Pio's famous quote, "Pray, hope, and don't worry." I mean, like, aren't we just supposed to not be afraid? Aren't we supposed to be past this because we're Catholics, because we're Christians? Help me understand. And I'm asking that, of course, a little bit devil's advocate here, but like, that's the thinking that people have, is that I should just be able to put this aside because I pray, or because the Lord's with me, or because this is the dictum that's given to me by the church. So help me understand how to interpret the bodily experiences we have with these directives that come from us from the spiritual tradition in the church.
I think at the very least we could say, as Catholic Christians, the church is not casual about being comfortable, being anxious all the time. That we are meant for something bigger or better. I don't think the church is trying to encourage us to be anxious about because we have anxiety. There's been many saints that have had this trouble and overcome it. So again, we're an overcoming religion more than a let's avoid every problem religion. So I think the main message from the church would be, if you are anxious and you do have a lot of fears, that's something you should address. That's something you should address. Now, we have the section on Von Balthasar in our book and that,
Mm-hmm.
and he's a big heavyweight thinker. He thinks the anxiety of fear of the Lord, which is all over the Old Testament, New Testament, is where a Christian should be. I don't want to disappoint God. We don't believe we're saved. I'm saved now. I don't have to worry about it. That's not quite our model, our approach. It's so I have to be wary that I could disappoint the Lord, and I could fail in my quest to be closer to Him.
Mm.
He finds that, I think, healthy. But the other different versions of that, at the very least, is trying to take a hard look at it. Even in the Mass, we always say, "Free us from distress." They used to use the word anxiety; they retranslated distress, which I think is a good
Oh,
move. We don't need clinical terms at Mass,
yeah.
but we aren't. I think we should at least be not casual about chronic anxiety in our lives. So a part of us should say, "I wonder if there's something I could do about that, possibly." Not in, but of course, there's a temptation. Then I'm failing, I'm worse off, or whatever. But was it? It's a great saying. St. Francis de Sales said, outside of
Mm-hmm.
sin, he said, anxiety is the worst thing.
Mm.
It's second only to sin. So clearly, I think, at least the church point of view, is don't be casual about totally accepting that. Now, overcoming it, I hope in the book we're not trying to imply it's easier. There's a real one thing fixes all everything. But there are some things that we can at least look into that have a pretty good track record and some new insights from neuroscience and psychology. And also, looking at the whole person that we've gotten since St. John Paul II and Benedict XVI and Pope Francis, certainly. Look at the whole person as a whole. So I think that we should not be casual about it. We should take a look at how we can improve and not be acting out of fear, but acting more out of love. I mean, that's the whole question, right? Am I doing the loving response or am I doing the fearful response? And we want to grow in more loving responses, I think.
And I think a part of that too is, destigmatizing anxiety for Catholics and Christians, because, we're told, to not worry, but yet many of us do. And, I think that being able to, give people some tools for helping with, the normal worries of the day, but also, some people are going to struggle with chronic and severe anxiety. And like many things that people struggle with, that doesn't make it their fault. It doesn't mean that they are, just because there are behavioral things that we can do to fix and address it, doesn't mean that somebody struggling with anxiety, it's their fault that they have this.
Right.
It might come from, experiences that they've had that were not at all their fault. And it might, or might come from, like trauma, for example, or it could come from, like an obsessive compulsive disorder, like where it's very much, there's a brain chemistry issue that's going on. And so I think it's really important for us to also think of anxiety when it really is, more significant or more severe, similar to how we think about other, chronic health issues. Like it is important for us to learn how to deal with it and to manage it, but that doesn't mean we're going to be able to make it go away. And prayer alone, if the Lord wills, that can work. But sometimes learning to deal with and manage the anxiety, that might be the cross that the Lord is asking you to carry. And he may not necessarily alleviate it entirely from your life.
Yeah. Amen. And the Lord allows the cross to come to us a certain way for a certain reason. And often the things that we struggle with becomes the vehicle of our salvation. I mean, that's just the way it works. And so just want to encourage people listening that if you do struggle with anxiety, like you're in good company, right? It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you, going back to just trying to alleviate any sense of shame surrounding whatever your responses are. And that the Lord created our bodies this way. I mean, he's the one who created our amygdalas and our sympathetic nervous system and our brainstem. He created that fight or flight response. He created our prefrontal cortex and the ability to have neuroplasticity to make connections and rewire our circuitry when necessary. God created us a certain way. And so let's have confidence in that and really want to encourage people in that space. In terms of just, we've been talking a lot about, all right, just some behavioral methods to help people kind of get some things. All right. We didn't talk about mindfulness today, but I have other episodes on that. But Art, you briefly mentioned just kind of practicing, sacrament of the present moment, doing that, reframe, being curious, just some of these basic tools that people can kind of have to use in their tool belt. How important is it, though, for people to do some investigation about where the anxiety comes from? Is it worthwhile, or to what degree is it worthwhile to explore our past and to explore maybe behavioral circumstances that occurred in our upbringing that have contributed to these patterns of behavior? It could also be, there's also a genetic component to it, of course, and that if there are people who are born more anxious than others. I think in the book you make reference to the free solo guy whose amygdala is rather small, and so he just doesn't have the same fear response that he can hang from a side of a mountain without any ropes and just not feel any fear because he genuinely is.
I don't think he'll ever get a life insurance policy from anybody.
I don't think he needs a life insurance policy, Art. I think he's got enough money that he's okay.
Well, yeah, he's probably okay on that.
but definitely not going to get one from the Knights of Columbus.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but just in terms of, all right, recognizing there's a genetic component to it, but to what degree do we explore our upbringing? To what degree do we explore our past? And when is that helpful? And,
Yeah.
and when does it not help anymore?
Well, I think that, if somebody's aware that, they have anxiety, maybe they're, starting to try to find ways of managing it a little bit better, to whatever degree that is. I think that, they're, you know, the first step is really just, I think, being aware, like, oh, this
Right.
this thing that I'm feeling is
Yeah.
anxiety.
This is anxiety.
Uh,
Yep.
I actually had that experience myself, postpartum with my second
Bless
child.
you. Yeah.
I found myself getting really angry, like, and I was,
Yeah.
and I've heard people using this term like postpartum rage,
Yeah.
and I realized after a little while, I was like, oh, that was anxiety. I had
Right. That's right.
to pause and figure out what was going on in these situations. I felt so unlike myself. These responses were not at all typical for me. But it took me pausing, not just beating myself up, but, having some gentleness and
Mm.
curiosity, and, looking into to try to figure out what was that trigger that was going on. And I realized I was having this fight or flight response that was being triggered in certain situations. And it was like this like, it was the fight response. This mama bear was like coming out,
Mhm.
inappropriately, like,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it made
Yeah.
sense on one level why I
Husband's
was,
like, you
but it was
just need
like,
to calm down. I'm the kid's,
yeah,
parent here. I'm the dad here also, right? So
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
part of this. Like,
And so being able to and then kind of exploring, like, what, like, so I would ask myself sometimes questions like, okay, what did that feel like? And did it feel at all familiar to me? Was there another time in my life where I
mm,
remembered having this feeling? And that's actually what helped me realize that, okay, this is being triggered in situations where I'm feeling misunderstood or not heard, or, like, that reminds me of like a way that I used to feel when I was a teenager, with my
right,
little siblings. And so something
right.
about that, being able to pause, maybe we can take a few deep breaths, because, again, breathing is another way that we can communicate to our amygdala that
Mm-hmm.
we're not in danger right now.
Mm-hmm.
If we're able to breathe, n- you know, breathe slowly, breathe evenly, that's one way of saying we're not running for our life right now. It might be okay. um Create some space to start thinking, and then kind of gently asking those questions of, what's going on here, where is this coming from? And,
Mm-hmm.
kind of depending on what comes up there, sometimes just the understanding can help with that self-compassion, so we're not piling on anger or frustration with ourselves on top of the anxiety that we're experiencing. It's one
Right.
thing to deal with anxiety, it's another thing to then be dealing with, I'm anxious and I'm angry at myself for feeling anxious. It's like,
Yep.
well, it doesn't
Yep.
help.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but learning to be, kind and curious, where is this coming from? What's going on? Because if we really know what's going on, then we can be much more effective in addressing it. So I think that's really one of the reasons that understanding what might be some of the origins of our anxiety, is
Mm-hmm.
because then we can be more effective in addressing it. Um,
Yeah.
but I do think that there can be a space where, you know, we don't want that to just turn into ruminating. We
Right.
don't want to just be, or just blaming, like, well, like,
Right.
my parents messed me up, and so that's
Yep.
why I'm the way that I am.
Yep.
Sorry. But rather
Tell
we
me
can
more
go,
about
so
that.
even if
How
it's
does
my
that make you feel?
fault, even if it's my parents' fault, like, now I'm an adult and it's my job to figure out how to take care of myself and my body and my emotions. You know, I need to, I need to seek the help that's appropriate.
Mm,
And, maybe that's reading some books. Maybe that is talking to friends, talking to a priest, talking to a therapist, even, if it's really complex and tricky, and if it's really interfering in our lives. So
Yeah.
because at some point you have to do something about it, you know.
At some point you have
Um,
to do something. At some point you have to take some ownership over and some responsibility about it and do something
exactly.
about it. Art, anything you'd like to add?
Uh, the Catholic thing, we do have an extra resource, which is to go inside and talk to Christ,
Hmm.
ask Him. I don't think that's often underutilized. He likes us to turn to Him. He never gets annoyed when we ask Him. He doesn't always answer things when we want Him to. But to be a Christian and a Catholic and not have that as at least a go-to move when you're stuck, afraid. He's the one that brings up the no fear thing a lot. So it's almost in a way of, because, as Catholic, we read a lot about the temperaments. Temperaments, how you tend to react. But we're not,
Right.
we're trying to respond with love or prudence, depending on the situation. But mostly we're supposed to respond with love. Well, that's not a natural reaction.
Hmm.
So we must have a different resource. If we're just kind of evaluating by people are cutting me off, my boss is a jerk, my wife's upset at me, my kids aren't well. We live in that world all the time. We'll probably act pretty much like that world. But we do have another move we can make. We can go inside and silence and reflect. And this is not just mindfulness, this is actually talking to the big guy, talking to Christ.
Right.
I just read your Beatitudes. Those are pretty tough. I don't know where I don't have that resource. I guess you do. Would you please help me here? Would you please help me here? Because I'm reacting, and I think you want me to respond with love, even to this boss, even to that kid, even to this situation. But I don't think he's not a coach on the sidelines. Mm-mm. He's not the coxswain saying, would you row harder, Bennett, please? Would you row harder? He's right there with us. And he said, guys asked.
It's a very specific memory. Art.
I'm glad I'm glad you asked. Let me give you that help.
Yeah.
And so that would be a shame, actually, as a Catholic, to not have that as part of our repertoire. Constant, really, I guess. I mean, not to say it's a magic bullet, but it is going, because in a way, anxiety and stuff, if you're only totally externally focused, particularly in our high achievement culture, there's never been a culture like this,
right?
Where Madison Avenue knows if you're anxious, you'll buy more. So we're gonna find it.
Oh,
we're
that's
gonna
right.
get hit by it very aggressively. If we don't have an eternal resource, they're not just our breathing and calmness; those are natural things, but also we can get real counsel from Christ. That's the one thing. That's one thing we can do that others can't, and that only He is the one that. I mean, whenever I look at the Beatitudes, I go, "Really, really." So He's very demanding, but He's radically supportive. So I would just add that, and I think the neuroscience supports it. It's going to a different place as well. It's trying to get up here where the homilies are and the prayers and Shakespeare and Mario Price and counsel as a clinician. All that's up here. And let's go after it. Let's use that. So I think that's another resource too.
Yeah, that's great, guys. Well, we appreciate all the recommendations. Now, we don't have enough time to even get into this, but just to encourage people that what we've been speaking about has been just general kind of experience, everyday experience of anxiety. There is a threshold where the fight, flight, freeze response, if the situation is significant enough that you've experienced that it crosses over into trauma, trauma is a different bucket. Trauma is a different bucket that requires a different set of skills. And you guys do mention EMDR in the book, and point people towards, we just don't have time to cover that in today's episode, but just letting people know that, of course, if you have experienced trauma in your life, that there are specific resources available to you to be able to deal with that at a different level than just the pieces that we've been speaking about, thus far. Well, one thing I just want to say as we're kind of wrapping up our conversation is that even though we've been talking about anxiety the whole episode, honestly, one thing that you guys have modeled so beautifully to me and to my listeners is the beauty of what a healthy adult parent-child relationship can look like. I'm serious, like I think it promotes, it poses a lot of anxiety for folks where I have my clients who are college students and young adults and they're like, I don't know how to talk to my parents, or parents are like, oh, my kids are growing up. I don't know how to react to them outside of them being kids. And so honestly, you guys have just done a beautiful job just modeling that for us.
I'm very lucky. Like my parents have always been really great and very supportive, and have always been willing to like listen and hear me out. And I know that like I know like you know I know you and mom worked really hard to do that, to have the kind of relationships with us that you know we could be open and learn from them and feel safe with them. So yeah, that's you know
Thank
I
you.
don't really know. I'm trying to figure out how to do that with my own kids now. but
But they're little, they're 1 and 3, so you don't have to worry about that just
but
yet.
it's great to know that it's really and especially now that I'm an adult and I see the relationships that my peers have with their parents or don't have with their parents. Like
Mm-hmm.
I realized when I got to college how incredibly lucky I was to have like intact parents and healthy parents actually.
Mm-hmm.
Not perfect, but like willing to like work through things. But yeah.
Well, also when your daughter's at college, you got to be careful. You know what I mean?
I keep them on toes.
No, that's my oldest. My
he's
oldest is
fine,
getting
so-
his degree in psychology.
Dad, but is there a problem being empathic here, Dad? No, I can step up to that.
When I was younger and I would tell people that I was pursuing my doctorate in clinical psychology, they're like, oh, like your dad who's a therapist. I'm like, no, I'm getting my doctorate.
I'm getting my doctorate. I'm going to one up my dad.
Yeah. Like, no, I'm going to surpass him actually. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually have the PsyD. He's just the lowly LMFT,
That's right. I know my place.
No, he 100% encouraged me in that direction.
Oh yeah. I said, don't stop here. Go, baby.
Yeah.
Go.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. I'm having that exact same conversation with my son right now. He's a junior in college. He's getting his undergraduate in psychology and trying to push him to move in that direction. So he's at a crossroads trying to understand, does he want to go the clinical research route, or does he want to do the therapy route? And so he's kind of we're weighing all those conversations right now. So
yeah.
Nothing at all related to anxiety, and I think we've bored our listeners at this point. So no, I'm just joking. Well, guys, thank you so much. I could have you on for another hour. I mean, that just flew right by,
This is really
and we could
fun.
have
Thank
continued
you.
this conversation going. So I really appreciate both of you coming on the show, and Lorraine making the sacrifice of watching the grandkids to give us the opportunity to talk. And so, Art, I've asked you this question before. This is a question asked to all my first-time listeners, all my first-time guests. But I want to ask you, Lianna, just what gives you hope?
Gives me hope.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of things, but one of the biggest things are probably the clients that I work with. I have never seen anybody work as hard as they have worked. And when I see them and I sit with them through their pain and their struggles, I feel like, anything can be possible. And the faith that they have in the Lord, and just every day just renews my own faith and my own sense of hope that, amazing things can happen.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah, the gift of being a therapist and getting front row seat in people's lives.
Incredible. People have no idea what a gift it is to walk with people.
Yeah, it really is. And to see those transformations happen and to see the Lord working in people's lives, it's like, oh yeah, it is possible. It is possible. So thanks so much for answering that. It's just a great answer. All right. Well, blessings to the three of you in the book. We'll have links to it in the show notes for people to be able to access it. Please purchase it on Sophia's website. Amazon's great too, but we want to support the publishers and the little guys. So Art, Lianna, God bless you both. Thank you guys so much for joining me and my listeners on the podcast.
Thanks for all you do, Mark.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
God bless you. Thank you so much.